Okay, so this is your organization lecture for Wednesday, and it's not a long assignment in that you don't submit much to me, but I think that this is a deep thinking assignment. It'll take you a little bit of time to understand what it is that you want to say about the passage. So let's get into it. I am focusing for the next couple of weeks on this skill of gathering evidence. We've talked a lot about a line of reasoning, we've talked about claims, we've set out how you establish your idea. But now I want to spend time thinking about evidence. How do you put the right evidence with your thinking? 7D, seventh is our writing strand, emphasizes this. Select and use relevant and sufficient evidence for your line of reasoning. So good evidence, but also enough evidence. And it's hard to strike this balance well. This is one of their knowledge pieces below, and I find this really interesting. So what does this mean? Developing and supporting an interpretation of a text is a recursive process. Recursive means circular. It means you don't get to say as a writer, well, I'm going to check this box and this box and this box and move blindly through my list. You always have to go back. You're constantly thinking about what you just said and asking, did I prove that? And then proving something and saying, how do I say it? So it's going to be a process that doesn't feel neat and tidy, especially when you're talking about a difficult text. They are also asserting something that I have very much found to be true. You can either analyze evidence, sit there with the text, staring at the pieces, puzzling it together, and then land on an idea. Or you can have an idea and then wonder, how did I get my idea? I guess I have to go back and find out the pieces that support it. In my experience, you will do both of these. You will not find yourself saying, oh, I always do the first. That's just the kind of writer I am. Or I always do the second. That's just the kind of writer I am. It depends on the content in front of you. In my experience, generally, if you have a lot of confidence about that particular text, either you know the style, you know the author, or it just speaks to you, you might naturally come up with an idea and then find that you're in the second camp. If you find a text in front of you to be more challenging, enjoyable even, but dense and challenging, then you might need to puzzle it together more. And of course, the same text can give you both experiences. There might be parts of it that speak to you immediately and parts of it you need to puzzle your way through. I think it's wise that AP, the College Board, is recognizing this process in us. Because so often teachers like myself, we want to say, this is how you do it. Come up with an idea. List all the reasons why you think it. That might be good and true if it's a topic you're really super familiar with. But in this kind of world, this literary world, they know it's not quite that simple. You're going to have to maybe back your way into your thesis or your claim. And then other times, again, you might just declare it. So today, we are going to be working with a difficult piece of text. I'm deliberately trying to find parts of the book that are inner monologues of Raskolnikov, where it is challenging, and where I think you will be more inclined to use that first, where you are gathering evidence, looking at the evidence, and then coming up with your idea. All right, so here is what that will look like in a real way. Steps for deducing a claim with evidence. How can we develop an interpretation and a line of reasoning for challenging prompt or text? This is the strategy that you can apply when you're faced with difficult texts you don't immediately understand, whose meaning and impact do not immediately lead you to a strong claim. I'm going to demonstrate this with a model, and you're welcome to flip to this, but I'll have it on the slide here coming up. My model is Raskolnikov moments before the murder, where he has a long series of inner monologues. Of course he does. This is on page 68 of my copy. I've made up a prompt. And then you'll have your passage. So here's mine. This is the model. This is not the one you'll get. I immediately am going to start reading for evidence, which just means I'm reading this thoughtfully, attentively, with a pen or a pencil, and I am already thinking what moments are giving me pause, what moments are really interesting. Okay, I'm gonna make the screen full and move my face out of it for a second, and I'd like you to pause the video and read the entirety of this passage. Right, go back. All right, pause. Now, I've got my good passage, my dense passage that I have to gather evidence from and I have to understand in terms of the prompt. Let us break that down into steps. So step 1. The first thing you should do when you're trying to write a really strong essay is jot down a quick list somewhere in the margins of the page of the literary elements of the AP course. You will not use them all, but it will be easy to have them all laid out so that you can use the ones you want, and they're all called to mind already. There are 6. Character, setting, narrator, structure, selection of detail, and then imagery or symbolism. If you've got all of those, then you know you're containing all of the literary elements that we talk about in the course. They will not give you any hints. They will not say, consider how imagery might be used in this passage. They used to give you a couple lit elements they wanted you to think about, but they don't anymore. So you're going to have to be able to call them all to memory, from memory. So I say, jot them down real quick. For the purposes of our assignment today, do make a chart just like mine, just like this. And then, step 2, based on the prompt, what do you really need to be looking for and thinking about? It's always going to generally be this language. Look for literary elements and techniques that reveal something. You will always need to do that, so you might as well have your list ready and be looking for those lit elements as you read. And then you will always need to ask yourself the question, how does the evidence relate to the meaning? How does what I'm gathering here relate to what I'm supposed to be looking for? And then you will always need to answer the question, and why does any of this matter? I mean, for the best essays, you'll have to do that. That last question, why does this matter? That is what will give you your best line of reasoning that leads to a great conclusion. So for this prompt, I am looking for lit elements, techniques that reveal his reaction or his rationale. And I'm wondering, okay, so how does that relate to the meaning of the entire novel? And then why does that matter? Step 3, I'm going to gather my evidence. So I'm going back to the text to do this, and I am going to choose 3 or 4 lit elements that strike me as particularly important. I wrote here at the top, what moments give you pause, right? As you're scanning the text that you've just annotated, what moments there are the most important for you? On the real exam, you will just annotate them. Most likely you're doing paper pencil, so you'll look at your notes, you'll look at the text. For me, if I go back to my passage where I have my yellow highlights, I have so many, but I'm very struck by characterization, the way that we learn about his character. I'm really struck by narrator. There's this moment where suddenly a first-person narrator shows up. And then there's the selection of detail. There's little moments that are interesting that he decides to insert. Lastly, there's a couple of pieces of imagery that I find interesting. I'm gathering all those up. I think they all relate somehow to Raskolnikov's rationale, the way that he is affirming that he is a thinking creature. He's got so much figured out, right? And I'm going to put them into my notes, or as it were, into the chart. So here's what that looks like. I've got characterization. He had no time, put off trifling details till he could believe in it all. His reason, he knows, will remain unimpaired. The narrator is that random first-person narrator. A couple of moments of selection of detail, and then my imagery or symbolism, I've got these similes, this keen as a razor, and like a disease, he thinks, men are overtaken by childishness, but he will not be. All right, so I think I've got here the evidence that will allow me to come up with a really good claim. Now, interpret my evidence. Ask questions of the evidence. What questions do I have? They are going to be specific to what you write. They're not general questions that I can give you now and say, apply these every time you see a text. It will be specific to what you think is interesting. So here's mine. I've eliminated one, by the way. You can see selection of detail is now gone. I think there's more in the other pieces. So I've got characterization. What I'm seeing from that evidence is he is overconfident. He is so sure he'll be unaffected by the carelessness that he thinks plague criminals because his is not really a crime. That's what he thinks. That's what he tells himself. He also affirms that he's not going to do any of this until he is committed to the whole idea, and the opposite ends up happening, as we know. Then that narrator evidence. What? Who is this? I say in my interpretation. A sudden, omniscient narrator appears, subbing in to assert what seems clear. He is going to lose his mind and require someone else's help to come in and speak for him, this narrator. And then lastly, I'm pointing out in my interpretation, these similes are both empty. His rationale is sharp as a razor. No, it ends up not being so. The criminal is overtaken by carelessness at the moment of crime, a disease that overtakes the criminal, but not me. And of course we know it definitely overtakes you. It in fact even becomes a kind of physical disease for Raskolnikov. So I've got my interpretation of the evidence, and now I'm going to ask questions of it. Why is he so confident, I wonder? He believes he is purely rational, and that really leads to this confidence. So something is wrong there, worth my exploration. And why would someone else need to speak for him? Oh, well, it's foreshadowing that he's overconfident. It's foreshadowing that he will not be as confident in the moment as he thinks he is, and that somebody else will need to come in. And then why is he mistaken so badly in the end? And I write there, well, he cannot perceive of these things in reality. There is a break between his mental experiment and the reality of the situation, as there should be. This is murder. It should be unthinkable. He is trying to think of it, which is his first mistake. And in so doing, he finds that the language can't quite meet the reality that he's going to face. So I'm trying to connect these things together. I feel an idea emerging from my discoveries here, a single discovery, as it were. And I'm going to begin ordering out these ideas of mine and affirming that central idea that I've come up with. So connect your best evidence together, order your ideas, declare your single discovery. Your best are probably 2 or 3 categories. You're not going to say 6 categories. You're going to narrow it down to the things that are most compelling. And of course, that central discovery is your claim, rooted deeply in your foundation, which is your evidence. And I love this because you provide evidence in an argument to deepen your thinking, not to prove yourself. Good evidence buttresses your argument, sure, but that is just a side effect of the primary goal, which is to deepen thinking. Too often in English class, we say you have to prove yourself, as if this were all a lawyerly posture. You get evidence because it challenges you. It builds counter arguments. If you seek evidence that does not agree with what you're saying, you got to grab that because it will deepen what you're saying. It will use that central idea and find the shade underneath it. And all of that is to be embraced. All right. So for me, this is what it will look like. I've got my ideas ordered. My first idea is characterization. My second idea will be imagery, and I'm going to end on that idea of an omniscient narrator, partly because they just don't fit quite in the middle, and I want to save it for the end in the end. My claim. In the passage from Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov demonstrates his overconfidence in his enlightened, rational mind, foreshadowing the ways in which he will lose his grip on reality. All right, so that is what I'd like you to do. I'm going to give you a prompt and ask that you back into the claim. Make a rough list of AP Lit elements, choose the ones that you're going to use for your argument, include evidence towards the prompt, and then interpret it. Then declare your claim or your thesis at the end. All of this is untimed. Take the time you need. In the end, you'll post essentially this last screen, this chart. It doesn't have to be a chart form. It could just be a list, but you're going to have your elements that you're using for evidence, and then your interpretation, and then your claim. None of this needs to be complete sentences. It can be bullet points, shorthand, just like the chart. The prompt is linked here in the slideshow. I won't show it yet. And then it's also in the quick view on the side of the website. So good luck and let me know how it goes, or if you have any questions.